is a nightmare. Man, that's the way it seems. Life is a nightmare.
Welcome to Today in Horrible History, your daily moment of historical misfortune. For today, February 13th, 2022, we head back to February 13th, 1935. On that date, the alleged kidnapper of the Lindbergh baby, Bruno Hauptmann, was found guilty of the kidnapping and murder and sentenced to death. And that, friends, is what was called at the time the trial of the century. So this was a very, very big deal indeed. Now, I know of there's a count of at least 31 20th century trials, which were referred to as the trial of the century. Two or three notable ones that come to mind were the Fatty Arbuckle case in 1921, the Scopes Monkey trial of 1925, and the O.J. Simpson trial from 1995, among many others. But arguably, the real trial of the century regarded the kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby. Now, first, we should note that Charles Lindbergh Sr., Charles Lindbergh at the time, in 1927, was the first person to make a solo heavier-than-air flight across the Atlantic Ocean. And this made him, it's important to add those details because people usually say he was the first guy to fly across the Atlantic, and that's not quite true. There were multi-person teams, there were dirigibles, but for one guy, solo flight in an airplane, huge deal. Charles Lindbergh became the guy. If nobody more famous in America, probably nobody more respected. So, when we fast forward to 1932, and his child with Anne Morrow Lindbergh, who, by the way, was a graduate of Smith College. This is the second Smith College graduate coming up in two consecutive videos. Yesterday, we dealt with Sylvia Plath. But when the Anne Morrow Lindbergh and Charles Lindbergh Sr. baby, Charles Lindbergh Jr., was kidnapped on March 1st, 1932, or that night, maybe it was March 2nd. Biggest deal ever, biggest crime ever. Imagine the most famous person in America's baby being kidnapped. There was a ransom for $50,000. The money was delivered. However, the baby was not delivered. The infant's body was found on May 12th in woods just about 4 miles from the Lindbergh family's home in New Jersey. The death was ascribed to a blow to the head, which some have theorized occurred accidentally during the abduction. So, Bruno Hauptmann was a German immigrant, actually an illegal immigrant because he stowed aboard a ship bound for the United States. He was a World War I veteran and a small-time criminal. And he committed a few petty crimes in Germany that he got in trouble with, including, interestingly, a burglary using a ladder. This will become important shortly. In any event, Hauptmann was pretty well convicted by the newspapers before the trial even started, in part probably because he was a German immigrant and it was easy to pin things on immigrants. Of course, everything's changed now. People just love immigrants now. In any event, Hauptmann was also described as the most hated man in the world, and this is before he's even found guilty of anything. So the guy probably wasn't going to get the best trial to begin with. However, there seemed to be a number of problems for Hauptmann, including the fact that there was a $10 bill that he passed to a gas station that the attendant wrote his license plate on shortly after the kidnapping, which turned out to be one of the $10 bills from the ransom money. There is the fact that he had almost $15,000, which was an enormous amount of money in the 1930s, in his garage that nobody could really account for. And the fact that a homemade ladder was used in the kidnapping, and that there was a hand-drawn sketch of a ladder found in one of Hauptmann's notebooks. So things look pretty bad for Hauptmann. It's conceivable, it seems likely that Hauptmann had some role in the kidnapping. He was found guilty, which seems to have been a foregone conclusion, and was executed the following year in 1936 in the electric chair in Trenton, New Jersey, which is already, just being in Trenton, New Jersey is already a punishment. I think you might beg for the electric chair, just visiting. Sorry, Trenton, but I got to call him as I see him. There have been questions in the decades following as to whether or not Hauptmann was actually guilty or was guilty alone. There's a very fishy character, no pun intended, named Isidor Fish, who was also an immigrant from Germany, who on the day of the day of the discovery of the Lindbergh baby body, that would be Charles Lindbergh Jr., applied for a passport and made his way back to Germany. He was suffering from tuberculosis and died a short term after. It also seems to have been a perpetually impoverished and shady character who, upon arriving in Germany, had $600 US on him, which seems to be a fairly large amount of money for a fellow who doesn't seem to have had regular employment when he was in the United States and left rather suddenly. He died of tuberculosis not long after re-entering the United States, and it seems like there may have been somewhat of a plot or conspiracy among at least two guys and maybe more to kidnap the Lindbergh baby, who, incidentally, it's believed that it was accidental, the death of the baby, but that still tends to... People don't tend to give you, cut you any slack for accidentally killing a baby. So there's that. More on, we're going to have more on so-called trials of the century in upcoming videos, but it's an all-around interesting case in that Hauptmann's widow, Anna, who was also a German immigrant, the rest of her life, for decades, swore that her husband had been innocent and was convicted and executed unjustly, and that it was the fact that they were immigrants that it was so easy to hang things on him. That may partially be correct. It's possible that the New Jersey State Police, in a rush to solve one of the most, probably the most famous case that they ever had in their lifetimes, may have put a thumb on the scales of justice, shall we say, by possibly even planting evidence or refusing to look at evidence, which may have pointed in other directions. That may well equally be true. And it's interesting to note that the head of the New Jersey State Police at that point was Norman Schwarzkopf Sr., whose son, Norman Schwarzkopf Jr., ended up being the general in charge of American forces in what we in the United States call the First Gulf War, or Operation Desert Storm. You may remember his bubblegum card from circa 1991, 1992. So that's a whole bunch of horrible history. It's an extremely famous case. It should be easy enough for you to find more information about it if you like. Those other cases are definitely going to roll around on the calendar, and believe me, we will deal with them. Please like and subscribe. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and remember, as always, that when you visit this channel, the rest of your day can only get better by comparison.
Life is a nightmare, man, that's the way it seems. life is a nightmare.